Somebody's watching. Oh,
Uh,
I get to consent to the recording.
oh, is that what it's saying now?
Yeah.
Nice.
Okay. Apparently, I've just consented to.
Yeah, I guess they're tightening that up. It used to be it would just tell you. And then now there's an audio that comes up. This meeting is being recorded.
Hmm.
And then it's, I never knew that you consent.
That's a new one for me too.
Cool. That means I can post it. You're consenting to me.
Oh, I don't get to watch it first.
I just slipped that in there. That's not actually from Zoom. That's from Sean. You didn't read the fine print.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
So we're having the talk about the if only
Yeah.
conversation.
So if anybody ever watches this sometime in the far future, we're always in the middle of conversation, and then we're like, oh, let's
Yeah,
record
we
this.
have to warm up. We got to get all the people's names and things out of
Yeah,
the way.
get that out of the way, and then we're like, okay, record. So that's why we're often in mid conversation and
Oh yeah, let's record this. This one will be good.
yeah. Well, so far it's I don't know if people's lasted this far. What are they talking about?
I think it's enough for me.
Yeah.
Long.
this, this is not helping me with my suffering at all.
You know what you could do is just
You see what I'm
stop the
bumbling.
recording in 15-minute chunks and post
Yeah.
them separately. Part 1, 2, 3, 4. Because then they'll go, oh, it's only 15 minutes. And then they'll watch that and then they're hooked and they want to know what's going to happen next.
Yeah. Well, have you watched our talks? This sounds familiar.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
We're going to have to add more stories.
They can, yeah, add more
And
stories.
stop right at the climax of the story. Like, stop the recording. Damn, I gotta watch part 2 now.
Michelle did what? I can't believe it.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. We'll see. All right. So the if only mind. Yeah. So the if only mind, I got that from Jack Kornfield. I think maybe he got it from Buddhism somewhere in the lore. And it's just basically this characteristic of mind that it's just if only this happens, then we'll be complete. Right. And if only that happens, then we'll be complete. And the thing is that we buy it, right? And so then we like, okay, so I'm going to get this, not knowing that the if only mind, it only has one gear, right? That's all it is. It's if only. So then that if we buy into that if only mind, we're in
Perpetual?
perpetuity.
Perpetuity, okay.
Something happened to his internet connection. I was watching this podcast. I don't know what it was, and there were these comedians, and every once in a while, the person that was talking would be like, and they would just stop and like, oh, she's frozen. All right. Yes, today's talk was brought to you by a bit of humor. So yeah, that's not much more to say about that. It's
This will be a
the
short one.
yeah.
We can end it here.
That's good. I can digest that much.
Yes. But I mean, the mind knows that, but it's different.
Knows what?
Well, it's easy enough to reason that, yeah, I can see that there's always something that, even as soon as this part of my life gets sorted out, this other part of my life pops up over here.
Right.
And so, I mean, you can see it, but really grasping that, it's okay to just stop chasing after and trying to get, it's like that game, right? Where you're whacking things on the head, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, let's go back to the driver, right? You don't need to whack the passenger.
You didn't like my.
That's what people do. That's what people go to retreats, because they can just so the passenger just gets so exhausted and just nods off, and it's like, thank God, thank God, it's shut up.
Right.
It's so peaceful. What? What? Yeah, it feels peaceful. This is great, eh? How did we get peaceful? Do you remember how we got peaceful? I don't. I don't know. I think it was
Let's
when
write
you
it down. We gotta write it down. We don't have to write anything. We're not allowed to have journals, damn it.
Yeah. I think it was peaceful because you shut up. Oh, good, good, good. Okay, let's figure out how can I get me to shut up? What can we do to get me to shut up? Um, maybe if we meditate more, that'll get me to shut up. Yeah, I don't know. So anyway, so the it's just the mind offering its guidance, right? And it's like, maybe if you had this in your life and had that in your life, then you'd have that completeness. And I'm kind of serious. It's not about whacking it. It's just like, yeah, I don't think so.
Right. Well, I guess I saw it as, you have these areas of your life. You have the relationship, your financial, your home, your health.
Oh, those are the ones you're trying to whack.
Right. And so it's like, okay, now I've got all these ones are
Oh,
fine.
that's the whack, because your whack is you're completing it.
Yeah, you're trying to like fix,
Oh,
okay, that one's
done,
fixed.
done, done, done.
Yes. No, I don't want to beat up my poor passenger.
Okay, gotcha. I thought that's what you were doing. I thought you were whacking the passenger.
But so because it's always an area of your life, and you see people, oh, look at them, they got this beautiful family and a beautiful home, wonderful job, but whatever you know, their spouse is cheating on them. I don't know, something, right? Like there's always everyone always had some area of their life that's just not working or not where they want it to be.
Yeah, that's why I was having a conversation with Barbara about Facebook the other day. That I think it's like, I don't know, it's probably not a revelation, but like, I'm not sure if Facebook is actually good for our mental health for the average person, right? Because you've got the person that's posting stuff, right? So that person that's posting stuff, they typically only post the highs, right? So they're posting the highs. And I don't say it's good for their mental health because then when they're experiencing lows, there's that distinction, right? That lows are bad and highs are good. And so I just want to get back up to the highs because I get likes or whatever. And then you got the person that's actually viewing the post, right? And they're in a low and they're they're looking at the high, and there's like, that's, God, I wish I had that person's life. Their life is so perfect. Right. And it's just like, ugh. So Barbara's like, I don't know. I know some people that kind of post when they're having really bad times as well. And like, yeah, that's cool.
But there is that comparison going on because people, yeah, they're going to post. It's like, the selfies. You're not going to usually post pictures of yourself, but you know, you're going to make sure you look a certain way. So it's,
Yeah.
so it's like that snapshot of how we want others to see us.
Yeah. That they'll approve. Getting that approval.
Yeah, approval and envy.
So I think if when we see, I mean, it always, for me, always comes back to the sense of self, right? So if we see the self as static and a thing, then it makes sense that we view it as a project, right? Because then it's stop in time, right? That, okay, I've got the house and the perfect partner and the perfect career, right? And stop it. And so if we're not, so I don't know if this is helpful, but when I get offered that suggestion by the mind, right, that if we only do this, then I actually kind of turn and look and like, okay, so who's getting something, right? Who is there to benefit from this? And it's funny because like the passenger's there as well, looking. So we look together and we see emptiness. And then the mind's like, oh, right. It's empty. So it doesn't do it for a while. It doesn't stop it from doing it again. Hang on, why don't we get our masters? We should get our masters. Then we'll be a little bit more complete. Right. Who are we trying to complete? Oh, right. I keep forgetting. Oh yeah, okay.
Right, because really there's just this now.
Well, yeah. And does it, like, viewing it as it is in terms of completion, does that seem appropriate? Right? That through that lens, right? If I had if I have the right partner and the right career and so much money in the bank, does is this like, then I'll be complete? Does that resonate at all? Is there kind of a different way of that it's selling it to you? Because it's selling you something. And what's the benefits that come with that?
I don't know. I guess I see the word peace.
So if you own your home, you have peace.
I guess it's also the security. It's coming down to that, right? Feeling like, oh yeah, right. I could stop striving or something.
Striving.
But I guess, yeah. So I guess it is like a security thing too. It's like, okay, now I can just rest or. Mm, I don't know.
No, you need to rest. Well, it's selling you a package, right?
Yeah.
And what's it?
Well, it's kind of the happily ever after package, maybe.
Right. So what do we get? What comes with happily ever after?
Ease. Yeah. Lack of strife. Yeah, I see that it's just this assumption that yeah, like you said, that it'll stop at this point, and then things won't, okay, I got this one. Yeah, it's like gaining. You're playing a board game, and okay, I got this many in this category, and this much in this category, and then boom, okay, I won. Thank God. Like I got it all now. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess in that way it would be like completion, but it's never going to be because it's all the different parts are always going to be this and that.
Yeah.
I
Like
mean, this.
it's, huh?
Well, I'm just thinking like if I try to really look at my life, like there's aspects that I wish were different, but then there's other aspects that I'm glad. Like my whole family is still around. I don't. My kids are healthy and happy, and at least I do have a house in this moment. I have a room to sleep in and a lovely place to be in. But it's that part, like we're looking at the future now. It was good. I felt free from that for a bit. I was like, yeah, I can just enjoy this now. And trust that everything will be taken care of, or but it feels like it's more like I'm always going to be somewhere, right? Like it is. I'm always going to be somewhere, and I can feel how it's more of an internal job as to whether or not I'm content. Like I'm thinking last summer I didn't have a place, but I was sleeping in my tent most places. In mama's backyard and I was fine. I was okay living in a tent. Right.
Mhm.
So yes, there is whatever the mind is telling that story. But when I try to just look at, okay, well, is there anybody here? It's elusive. That looking at it that way. I mean, the closest I can get to is, okay, well, all I ever have is this moment, and in this moment, it's just this being here. I mean, I don't know. It feels like there's something here, right?
You're talking about you now.
Yeah.
Where does it reside?
Here, whatever this is.
So in your skin?
Well, it's a combination, right? It's like whatever the energy is here, the awareness that's here. It's this body, but I mean, I wouldn't go. I can't quite say it's just the body because it feels connected to me, and right, like it seems like it's something made up here that this energetic level or whatever it's here. So it still feels like there's a who here.
Hmm. But where?
Here.
Where
Doesn't
here?
feel like it's there. So yeah.
So it feels like it's in the body.
Yeah. And it's not that it's not the body, either. I mean, I know I'm not just my body, but it doesn't, it feels
How
like,
do you know that?
how do I know that I'm not just my body?
Yeah.
Well, I guess I don't.
So I guess is that just
Well, in this awareness, it is my body because it's these neurons firing and this
was that your
brain
experience?
thinking.
But is that your are you aware of your brain thinking?
Well, that's what I've read about in books, I guess, and right,
Right.
of how the process works. But I'm seeing out of these eyes.
Right. And is what you're seeing you?
Well, if I lift my arms up, maybe I can see my body sitting here. Yes.
So what else? What's in front of you?
Well, I can feel my breath going in to my body, right? Like my breath expanding in my lungs. And
So is that breath you?
no. Well, maybe once I breathe in the oxygen and it mixes in with my body.
Then
Maybe.
it's you.
Well, it's like drinking water, I guess, right? Like I'm what, 70% water?
Yeah.
75, whatever it is. I drink the water, it becomes me. I eat the food becomes me. The building blocks of this body.
But they're not you until they've entered your past your lips.
Cells. It's gone into my cells, I guess. Been changed. There's a hummingbird outside the window.
So so why do you think your hand is you? Like look at it.
Right. And I know, yeah, if my hand got cut off, is that losing a part of me or is that just the body? But it feels like, I don't know, there's like a sense energetically in some way that I don't understand. But it still feels like there's this presence here. I mean, there's someone talking,
Yeah.
there's someone hearing you and filtering everything you're saying through my brain. So why don't you explain to me how you see it then? So you don't see your body as you. You don't see your thought. You don't see anything here as you.
What's all of me? Like I just like where this hand begins and where it ends, there's this no sense if I'm really pay attention and honest to myself that this is not me, me, not me. It just doesn't feel that way. like, and that's like why we talk about personality, right? And we talk about self, and we've talked about free will and choices, and kind of why those intrigue me so much is because when we kind of deconstruct them, we slowly deconstruct the building blocks that we take to be ourself, right? So we take that this is my hand because I have control over this hand, all right? Now, neuroscience has proven that that's just a chemical reaction in the brain that let's say enables me, maybe that get that motivates me to consider this me. All right, so I think I don't know if we talked about this before, right? So that the rubber hand experiment, have we talked about that? So
I don't know.
they took, they had people sit down at a table and put both their hands on the table. Then they took one hand and put it under the table. And then they took a rubber hand and they put it right next to the other one. And so and then they put like a shirt on or covered it so that it looked fairly close to that person's hand, right? And then they would stroke the person's actual hand so they could feel the stroke happening. And then they would also stroke the rubber hand. And so the brain starts getting confused, and it slowly starts being convinced that that's its hand on the table. And they've actually had people hooked up to EEGs or whatever, and will hit that rubber hand with a hammer, and they say that the brain reacts in the same way that it would if you were to hit its actual hand. So
Yeah, no, I hadn't heard that one before.
yeah, so what that's, and like I've read about people that have participated in the experiment, they said that there's actually a point, and it's really strange, where it's something clicks in the brain, and that rubber hand is now your hand. And I've experienced that. Like I've been at retreats, probably intensives, and it's like late at night or whatever, and so the brain is getting kind of more and more tranquil, and it just came clear. Honestly, it came clear, but I was no longer convinced that it was that this was my hand any more than my partner's hand was my hand. Like I didn't have control of how their body moved, but for that moment, having control was not. It was I guess in some ways kind of let go of as one of the criteria for what was me and what wasn't me.
Right.
So and I think I've talked about this before, like there was just, it came a point where, I couldn't, when I looked for me, I just couldn't find it. And and there was kind of a little gathering of the committee in some ways or whatever. And it was like, okay, so are we definitely sure that I don't exist? That the I doesn't exist? I said, well, we're not definitely sure, but it's pretty questionable. When we look for it, we can't find it. Well, could that just be a problem with our perceiving instruments? Maybe, it could be. But then it's kind of like, okay, well, which way of viewing the self brings a greater sense of freedom and peace? And I was like, well, I think viewing the self as a fluid, liquid, non-local activity definitely seems to bring more peace and freedom. So I was like, okay, well, let's do that from now on. Until we get irrefutable proof that the self does exist, then we'll just go. We'll take that leap, and we'll act as best as most we can that it doesn't exist. And I've yet to find any more proof that it exists in that way. Like, I get that there's neurons firing. I mean, that in that video I sent you that you found hard to process, Walensky. So he talks about Nisargadatta Maharaj, right? You guys talk about him a lot at intensives. He had make this comment that fluids come together and the I am appears, right? So fluids come together in the brain, chemical reactions, create the sense of I. And like, I can't dispute that. That seems like there's definitely I guess in some kind of consciousness or some kind of awareness going on here. And like you said, right? So I cut my hand off. I'm still going, right? I cut my legs off, my torso, I'm still going. But there comes a point.
Tin Man and the Wizard of Oz.
Right. I mean, I'm pretty clear that there comes a point where you mess with the brain and I stop existing. Like, maybe I exist some other way, but that's speculative and it's not anything I've ever experienced. So, but there seems no plausible reason to limit it to the body. And it's kind of like, once I dropped that.
Right. But so, like, say you have someone who's got dementia, then, right?
Yeah.
At a really extreme level, that is, they're not actually even aware of the I, maybe, right? Like, they're just. So, does that mean they no longer exist? because they're still sitting there. They're still needing food. Like just because they're not that neural piece isn't there with a solid personality, does that mean they don't exist? Like, how does that fit in?
To my schema.
Yeah.
Um,
Because that's sort of what you're saying, right? It's like you don't exist. Or that is that what you're saying? Or are you saying that you're everything?
yeah, the second one. Yeah, there's definitely something here that's existing.
Okay. But you just doesn't feel like to you like there's a limit to it.
No, no, it doesn't. Any limits don't really make sense. So do you still need that dementia person? Does that still need to be explored?
Well, what would you say then? Like if someone, then they don't even have a sense of the I, maybe. But
Right. Then they're even less contained than I am in some ways.
right. So, I mean, because you're still work on fixing your bathroom and the,
Yes.
like negotiating the house, feeding yourself.
Right.
So all of that still happens,
Yeah, exactly.
but without feeling that there's someone there that's fixing the bathroom or
Well, this body's definitely fixing the bathroom. Right? So there's a body, there's a personality. There's probably the self hanging about, right? That once the bathroom's fixed, life will be so much better, right? Or whatever. What? So what's your questions? What's your exploration?
well, you're saying when you ask if there's anybody here, then you can't find anyone. But yet you're still doing all these things.
Yeah, someone is.
So someone was there like this little parasite somewhere in your brain that's pulling levers and moving arms and like
Well, it's no. Well, it doesn't seem that way. It just seems like there's a personality that's going about its stuff. And and there's times when the personality gets really agitated, and and that's fine. Like, I guess, so what's the conundrum for you? What's the disconnect?
Well, I guess it's coming back to, when you're asking me, can you find the self?
Yeah.
And I can't, I could pretend and say, oh yeah, there's no self here. But in reality, that doesn't feel like the truth. It feels like there is something here, like there's this self. And, I mean, maybe it's a combination, like you said, the personality and the self and the awareness.
Well, yeah, so that, I guess that's the tricky part about language, right? So, and maybe that's the language I used in our, when we used to talk about it previously. Like a self happens, but like said before, right? So it's a happening, right? The self is a verb, it's not a noun. Right? There's this, yeah, there's the self of Michelle, right? And in it, it's kind of like we talked about the water flowing out of the spring,
Right.
right? And so that's my sense of self. There's this flowing. Whereas it used to be, my sense of self was this container of water, right? That has purities and impurities, and I can, sometimes I get a bit low, add it up, put the right bits of chemicals into it or whatever to make it to somehow make it more perfect. So that's like there's a flow, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't really make sense trying to make that flow more perfect or more complete.
Right. That makes more sense. Yes. Like, rather than saying there is no self. But that's not what you were saying. You were just saying you couldn't find the self.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it gets a bit
So there's no complete, there's like, yeah.
contradictory.
So there's no, I mean, so the way I'm sort of feeling it right now, it's like you're saying there's no solid container, like you were talking before, because that made sense, right?
Right.
As this flow, that's all there is. It's just this continuous flow, and we're trying to build a container, struggling to build this container of a me with certain adjectives attached. Because I was thinking the same way actually before. It's like, well, it's like I'm not adjectives, I'm verbs. You said you're not a noun, you're verbs.
Right.
But it's similar. Like I was actually thinking that. Yeah, like that'd make a good title of a book somehow, right? Yeah. And so in that way, okay, that made like what? How did you say it's like this fluid
Well,
thing?
this flow of the self is just kind of this flow of personality.
And what did Nisargadatta say about it?
Well, fluids come together and the I am appears. So
I'm picturing like a whirlpool stuck in the river.
well, he's talking about the sense of self, right? So even he had a sense of self,
Yeah.
but it just wasn't who he was. And I would tend to concur with that, right? This sense of self is something that's playing itself out within the vastness that I am.
In which case, the who is the same as the what.
Yeah, I don't know about all that stuff. Well, maybe, but maybe the what, if you want to look at it from that thing, right? So the what is everything,
Mm-hmm.
right? And perhaps the who, if you could say the who is that flow of personality, right? Because I think, right, Charles Berner, he thought it was helpful to differentiate that, right? So the what, so we're all the same what, but we're all very unique who's,
Mm-hmm.
right? So your who is different than my who, and my who is playing out within what I am, but so is your who is also playing out within what I am.
So when you said it's a good artist who, the personality or the sense of self is not who he was. It's not
Well,
who he was.
it's not what he was.
I see. Okay. So it's just playing with the
I mean,
word.
that's just my guessing. I mean, trying to compare my experience and kind of and overlay it onto his, which I think in a sense was maybe a bit more empty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's interesting. Because what I've been feeling is like a lot of agitation or something, or just it's, so just now coming back to that whole imagery again, just that flow. It feels like there's a little bit more peace with it,
With it,
with the imagery or the awareness that yeah, it's,
right?
and once again I'm trying to hold something together.
Yeah, that's just also playing out.
That's what.
That's also just playing itself out,
Yeah.
right? That's the that's the kind of the conundrum, is that we we like to cut ourselves up into different compartments. Right. So if you're okay if I just use what you experience as an example, right? So so there's this agitation, there's this agitated me, there's this I'm in kind of a bit more at ease with this agitation. And I'm also trying to kind of hold this whole conversation and then what's happening in my experience and being at peace with it, trying to kind of get some perspective on it, trying to digest it in a way, right? And we get hypnotized into thinking one of those is more us than the other, right? And in my experience, it's all just coming out of the geyser. And so even like I'm trying to make sense of this, I'm trying to hold on to this, right? And it's just like, yeah, so what? Right? That's just another piece of the spin that's unfolding itself. And I think if people on the path, if it, like that would, I think it's really helpful to get that the whole the whole thing is just more of the thing. Does that make sense? Or is that? I think I touched my. I hit my cable with all my hand gestures. The whole thing is more of the thing.
Yeah, the whole thing. And so I'm sensing that it's almost more like my system senses something that feels that it can digest or something.
Right.
So now, but then that's also part, I'm getting what you're saying, but in the moment, it's not like I'm feeling that like one or the other is more me. It's just one or the other is more at peace. It feels better, right? There's less suffering. There's less suffering if I can just be okay with the suffering. Even,
all right. So one thing that Hale used to say was that you can't have suffering without a sufferer. He says you can have seeing without a seer. You can have hearing without a hearer. You can have feeling without a feeler and all the other sensations. But if you check, you can't have suffering without a sufferer. And any time that that container of self is seen through, suffering disappears with it. I mean, that's what I was guided to, and that's been my experience. Like, I don't know, I guess suffering is also just a language, right? But like suffering has a certain flavor to it that's totally unique. And so like it's like if you observe somebody, there's no way you can tell whether they're suffering or they're not, because it's totally subjective. And the way I use the term suffering, Like suffering for me is this deep core wanting things to be other than how they are.
Mhm.
Right? Like it just kind of permeates our being that however now is, it's not bearable and it needs to be other than how it is. And it seems that it's completely linked to that container of self.
Mhm. Comes back to what we originally started with, the if then.
Yeah, if then I'm complete. Because the story of completeness makes total sense to a container,
Mhm.
right? But it makes absolutely no sense to a
To
stream, to a flow. It doesn't equate in any way. So the stories of that we started talking about, right? About that if this, and then that's completely requires a container perspective
Mm.
to 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 be invested in those stories. And it doesn't stop the passenger from offering that guidance because in some ways that's, I don't know, say this, but it can kind of, some aspect of mine can only kind of view the world as through a container, and it, so all of its guidance is is offered through the container glasses. And that's why I would say, like, so it would offer me this guidance. We would look, we don't see any container, we see is this flow, and we say, okay, well, that doesn't apply to this, does it? No, you're right, it doesn't. Okay, I'll go back to the drawing board and come up with something, something else, which it always does. There's no shortage of guidance, but it's pretty much all container guidance.
Okay, that's a good metaphor. That one. Yeah, I want to build a container to hold that container metaphor in. Okay, I gotta hang on to that one. Yeah, I'm gonna hang on to that.
Well,
I'll rewatch the video. Right, the container.
we have to come to a way of digesting it, how our personality can digest it,
Yeah.
right? That, I mean, I had to, I still do that, right? I have to take it, like, and kind of do some alchemy on it, I guess, or whatever, and then kind of make it something that resonates with me. And that's something that Hale would always say, and I always say to anyone I'm offering support to, is like, don't believe a word I say, right? Take it, try it out yourself. Try, like you didn't really say this, but what you're saying kind of adds to it, like figure out a way to digest it
Mhm.
that works for you. And maybe over the years, that's kind of something that I've learned a bit more. is that because I used to just think that however I digested it, I can just, it's like that mother bird, right? I can just like throw up into the baby's mouth and they're good to go.
What? Sorry, I missed that.
I took the digestive metaphor too far. Well, the story is just that I've digested it, and so I can just regurgitate it to others what I've digested,
Right.
and they should be able to just, oh, that's makes so much sense. Of course, my
Right.
suffering's over too. Thank you. Well, you're welcome. Carry on. Show others.
Right.
Yeah. So it doesn't, like, even today, like I was talking about the completeness, right? And that didn't seem to be kind of landing. So I'm just like, okay, so what? Maybe there's another way that this that's being that that what's being sold by the mind is being interpreted and cherished. Right? For me, it's always completeness. It's always that just resonated with me. That because that's like happily ever after to me is that's complete, right? The story is complete, right? There was a journey, and this and that get added, and finally it's complete.
Right. You come home to yourself, back to the place where you started, that whole thing.
Right. Yeah.
It's like the inner journeys, metaphors of, yeah, going off, doing battle and meeting all these challenges. And in the end, you
Right.
come back and you're happily ever after.
And I think that this spiritual path gets sold a lot like that.
Yeah, well, that's what I meant. Like, that's like the metaphor of the spiritual path.
Right. Yeah. And I do this, that, and the other thing, and then I'll be complete.
Hmm.
And there came a time where I just wasn't so sure about that anymore. And so I was just drawn more and more to teachers that would their message was you're absolutely complete as you are right now, and you'll never be more complete than you are right now.
Hmm.
It's like, okay, that's my hook. I'm hooked in. Feed me more. How do I get to experience that? How do I get so that my my experiences equates with that? Because it didn't at the time.
Hmm.
But I was really tenacious. Is that the word? Like Hale, I remember at a seminar he's talking about how he he was teaching us how to release for all the different methods for releasing and stuff, and somebody asked him about what he uses, and he says, I don't really use any anymore. Like it things just kind of seem to release naturally without too much effort. And I put on my hand, I says, how does that look, Hale? How does that look? Like what does that like? But he really liked the analogy, how does that look? So he says, oh, it looks like this. And he like stood on one leg or something and hopped around. It's like, okay, dumb question, I get it. But slowly over time, that's gradually kind of become my experience. And then,
What, that you could hop up and down one leg?
yes. Well, I actually made that my practice for a while, and it worked. 'Cause it would feel so good when I stopped.
Don't try this at home.
How long has this been? Wow, over an hour. Is that, is there any more around that, or?
No, my mind is really content with the river analogy. And the idea that you can't complete, it can never be complete because it's the river. That totally makes sense. Yeah. So it's just
All
this
right.
constantly changing thing.
And like there was this one teacher, he talks about this Greek philosopher. I think it was Heraclitus. He that was one of his favorite, I don't know, sayings or whatever. Like you can't step in the same river twice.
Ooh, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that took a while to sink in for me. But when you think of the flow, right? Like you just said, that made me think of that when you talked about the because that's what we're trying, that's what we're trying to do with the container, right?
Yeah.
But you just can't. And that's why the container it's doomed from the beginning.
I guess people want to believe that it's more like a lake then.
Maybe. But like the mind, it doesn't stop the mind at all from wanting to do it. I remember having this in retreat, having this image, like my mind keeps building these, like it's got this factory and it builds these bricks out of sand, and it's like very happy. It's such an awesome looking brick. Let's build something. So then I take it and I put it over there, and it drops just into this big puddle of water. Right? So then it's just it's dissolved and it's done. But that doesn't, I'm just like, okay, I guess this is what I do. So I took the brick, next brick, put it down. And that in some ways is kind of, right, there's this, for the most part, we don't look there. We just take the bricks and we think we're building something, right? And I guess in some ways, spiritual practice is about turning and looking and saying, oh, I'm not actually building anything. It's completely empty. But what's that?
My phone. Mama's
But
calling.
your mom, Mama is calling.
Our mom.
Oh yeah, Mar. We have one together.
But
But yeah, so
well,
that's kind of like living. We
yeah,
just
I can see
we
that. So it's
consider,
like there's this action, but really, it's just about the one that's moving it back and forth.
right, and that's kind of existing, right? So like you said, like there's a bath, I'm building a bathroom. And this part of my mind thinks that there's something solid, but it's inherently empty.
Hmm. It's just something you're doing. It's
Yeah,
gonna. I mean, even on a physical level, it's gonna disintegrate someday.
right. Yeah,
That even works that way.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Uh,
That's a good spot to end.
yeah, in the river.